Good evening. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, and welcome to another episode of Commander's Gridiron, where we talk all things on the field, off the field, Washington Commanders. And as you know, it's been 3 weeks since we've had our last episode. So, one, thank you for tuning in. And we got a lot to cover. As you know, the tampering period of NFL free agency officially started yesterday morning, which basically has 2 to 3 days of a tampering period where teams can negotiate with free agents and work trades and stuff like that, but nothing will be further announced until the 12th. Actually, tomorrow is when they can officially be announced. We'll talk about that later in our show. For those of you new or joining us tonight, you will see across the bottom of your screen the topics for tonight, so you can follow along, see what we're going to talk about, see what we have talked about, see where you can chime in. Speaking of chiming in, feel free to use that comment bar, whether you're watching us on Facebook, YouTube, or X/Twitter. We love comments, we love highs, we love hellos, we love the trash talk and the banner between football fans, as well as whether you have questions about our beloved DC Commanders too. So feel free to drop a comment and we'll get to that as well. As you know, with the format here at the show, we start our show with some off the field news, and it seems like it's kind of hit or miss. Almost every week, there's something off the field to talk about when we do a show. And of course, as we know, there's no shortage of that for us. And in the 3 weeks since our last episode, it actually came out in the DC news, courtesy of WUSA 9 News, the CBS affiliate out of DC. The DC Mario Bowser, as you know, we've talked about it at great lengths here on our show that, the federal land was transferred back over to DC proper to allow them to use it. I think it's on like a 99-year lease, something like that, and all that good stuff. The intent is to develop it with the thought of a new stadium, possibly if the Commanders agree to go back to DC. Well, one of the things that came up with that was Mayor Mario Bowser's vision for the new NFL stadium as the anchor of a redevelopment plans for the RFK complex. Now, one of the things that was kind of hotly contested or talked about as a result of that press conference and that plan unveiling, so to speak, of the RFK complex was that they would basically limit the amount of true football parking lot space, essentially tailgating space, in lieu of kind of what you see at Nationals Park that they did down to Navy Yard, where they erected multiple parking garage towers. I think there's like 3 in the outfields of Nats Park. So, of course, fans then came to chime in, what about the tailgating space or the space for tailgating that has come to know every Sunday afternoon that thousands of fans love and enjoy, right? So here's the deal. The RFK complex campus spans 174 acres, but after preserving the congressionally mandated 52 acres for recreation, which is like green space, outdoors, parks, blah, 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 blah. And allocating 20 to 25 acres for a possible stadium itself, only about 100 acres remain for other development. The other development being retail, commercial, residential, kind of like the taxpayers, some shopping and stuff on the first floor, apartment buildings on top, that kind of deal, right? Which basically means less space for parking, as we kind of knew it with the old RFK stadium. So then the question begs, would fans mind not having the tailgate space allocated for the new stadium? And yes, there's a lot of fans that do put a lot of heart and soul and energy and money into their weekly tailgate performance for other fans to utilize. And, so here's the opinion of the Commander's Gridiron, right? There will still be a way for fans to tailgate if the stadium goes to RFK complex. It's going to be a given. People always find a way to do something. You tell them they can't do it, they're going to find a loophole. They're going to find a ways around it. Look, even though there's not a lot of direct parking, and I'll use Baltimore as the close example because they're close in proximity, there's still a lot of tailgating opportunities in Baltimore, right? Even though there's not a plethora of parking lots completely surrounding Raven Stadium. Having said that, what drives fans to the stadium? Now, it's not to say that tailgating is dead and it's a dying art and all this other stuff, because it'll still be alive and well. However, having said that, when fans are paying an optimal price for their tickets to go into the stadium, what you're seeing now with more stadiums and even newer stadiums, as you may traverse the country and get to the opportunity to go to away stadiums, is the fan experience. What I mean by that is not necessarily tailgating, but what is inside or directly encompassing the stadium directly, right? Case in point, you go to Arizona, you go to Dallas, you go to SoFi and stuff like that. Tailgating isn't as prominent. Why? Because once you get your ticket scanned and you go inside the concourse area of their stadiums, they make it worth the fan experience to spend your time there until the game starts and then directly after the game. So, is there still going to be tailgating at the RFK complex? Yes. It's probably not going to be as pronounced and everything like that going on like it was before in the glory days of RFK and all that good stuff, but it'll still be there. The team has to take the opportunity to build the fan experience inside the stadium complex for the fans to enjoy. Let's be honest, if they go to RFK, which is kind of the fan favorite and where everybody wants, mass transit is right nearby, way much more convenient than it was, or as it is, in Landover at Northwest Stadium. It's going to be just like the hockey games in downtown DC. Fans are going to take the metro, not necessarily go to tailgate, get the fan experience, go get the football game, enjoy the fan experience post game, and then leave, right? That's what they're going to do. Enough said. Real quick, chop in. Hey, look, Paul, our buddy Paul Spencer, one of the two hosts of them 215 boys here at Out of the Box Sports that you can catch on Wednesday nights at 9:30. Says, hey, what's up, buddy? Boy, oh boy, the Commanders are spending money and building a team to hopefully surpass those birds. Man, I hope they do. We still got a couple significant holes, especially on defense. We're going to talk about that later on in the show. And then we're also going to talk about our free agency frenzy that we've kind of been putting together courtesy of GM Adam Peters. And hey, look, if we get Paul as one half of them 215 boys, Dave Yarnell's the other half, right? Great dude. Catch him with Paul on Wednesday nights. Hey, what's going on, Steven? Hey, great. Thanks for checking in, guys. I know there's been some struggles with you guys in free agency and kind of opening up the checkbook here over there in Dallas, but it's nice to see that, even today on technically day 2 of the tampering period, you guys did get a couple of players under your belt, hopefully to fill some of those holes out there in Dallas. I know it's not the big splashy names you're kind of looking for, but, definitely not going to hurt anything. Signing players to either make an immediate impact now or the depth players that, a lot of teams, whether it's O-line, defensive line, even other positional players teams need so much of, right? Speaking of needs and what we need, we know that in the 3 weeks we were off, the NFL Combine, annually hosted in Indianapolis, Indiana at Lucas Oil Stadium, took place. And it was kind of interesting because, we know that as a whole, the defense is where a lot of the needs and attention needs to go for the Washington Commanders in the upcoming draft. We're going to talk about draft picks because, we started out going into the Combine with like 7, 8 draft picks, but then lo and behold, with a couple trades, one to San Francisco, one to Texas that we're going to talk about in a little bit. We will use the Combine to kind of evaluate the collegiate talent. Now, not every draft pick goes to the Combine. Some by not getting invitations, some by choice because they don't want to. Well, almost all of them participate in medical and interviews, and then it's up to the player's choice whether they actually want to participate in on the field drills or skip it and do it at their collegiate pro day at a later time. A lot of the bigger names, typically, the way it's going in the last couple of years, will skip the performance period on field at Lucas Oil in lieu of their pro day. But then, like I said, they still have to show up, do the medical, do the team interviews, and then they bolt, right? So it's So it's definitely something that gives teams exposure to certain players. So speaking of the combine, it's interesting that the Commanders had informal meetings with the following players at various basically pro days, team pro days at the combine. And what do I mean by that? So, okay, look, we talked to Gus Harding, offensive center from Purdue, Jenkins, linebacker from Purdue, Mabo, who was actually an offensive tackle from Purdue, Jack Nelson, offensive tackle from Wisconsin, Essa Pohl, offensive tackle from Washington State, Miles Price, wide receiver out of Indiana, Curtis Rourke, quarterback out of Indiana, Jaheim Thomas, linebacker out of Wisconsin, Trey Welding, offensive tackle out of Indiana, CJ West, defensive tackle, Kyle Williams, wide receiver out of Washington State, Hunter Waller, safety out of Wisconsin. Now, there's probably another 10 to 12 guys that, you can add to that list. As we know, not only with the combine, but then, we have the East-West Shrine game, the North-South All-Star game, right after college bowl season as well. So then they talk to a lot of guys down there, a lot of the same guys that were on that list. The thing that's kind of interesting to note about that list of about 10 guys, most of them were offensive linemen, a couple defensive linemen, 2 wide receivers, and a safety. So kind of all needs that we have as a team, especially on both sides of the trenches for us. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where they go, and, where they put their attention, who they kind of direct that attention to as they move further into the draft. But before we can get to the draft, lo and behold, what happens? My goodness. Washington decides AP's cooking up a storm, and he trades for Debo. Right? Maybe not this Debo that you see on your TV, on your screens, but Debo, right? Debo Samuel. Why is that important? Because Debo has been one of the most prolific offensive weapons, predominantly at wide receiver, but also used as a running back. Basically that Swiss Army knife, kind of like the Taysom Hill was used in New Orleans, but a lot better, right? Obviously, he had a little bit of injury, a little out of shape last season, but still a really good guy. So the first 2025 offseason NFL trade was actually between the San Francisco 49ers, who agreed to send standout wide receiver Debo Samuel to the Washington Commanders in exchange for a 5th-round pick. Now, I know I'm going to butcher this up, so I don't have it written down in front of me, but let's follow along. Back last year, when Washington traded Jahan Dotson, wide receiver who ended up winning a Super Bowl ring with the Eagles, to the Eagles, they got a 5th-round pick. Or they got a pick for Jahan Dotson. AP turns around, trades that pick to New Orleans in the middle of the trade deadline for Marshawn Lattimore. Gets a 5th-round pick in return from the Saints with Lattimore, and we gave up like a 3rd and a 4th, or a 3rd and a 5th, or something like that, right? I know, clear as mud. AP then turns around and takes that 5th-round pick that he got from New Orleans and gives it to San Francisco in order to get Debo Samuel as our number 2 wide receiver here in DC. Like any trade and agreed to, it can't be processed until the new league year begins tomorrow, Wednesday, March 12th, but brings a whole lot of excitement as well to the DC area, DC fans, because we've been screaming to get a true number 2 wide receiver behind Terry McLaurin. Now, the San Francisco agreed to send wideout Debo Samuel to the Washington Commanders for that 5th-round pick, as I said. But where it becomes interesting is Washington is taking on the remainder of Samuel's contract, single year, full $17.5 million salary for the 2025 season. Now, San Francisco will absorb $31.5 million in dead money hit on this year's salary cap because of Samuel, who has 1 year remaining on his contract, but it will count as $17.5 million against Washington's salary cap. So what's likely to happen is one of 2 things. Either A, Debo is only going to be on that 1 year rental, see how he does, see how he performs, and then kind of go from there. He's going to test the free agency market, go somewhere else, or he's going to re-sign with Washington. Or Washington makes the jump and tries to restructure and extend, signing a contract extension for Debo to get the ultimate salary cap hit down for next season. He had a dominant 2021 season, nearly carrying the 49ers offense to the Super Bowl, and it came up just short, right? But he had 1,770 scrimmage yards, 14 total touchdowns, as they came up just short in the NFC Championship game against the LA Rams that year. So, can he reproduce that productive season in 2021? Fell off a little bit in 22, kind of stayed right on with 23, and then last year kind of dipped down because we know the struggles of the offense that they had out in San Francisco. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with Debo going forward, that, how Cliff Kingsbury utilizes him in this offense. You can honestly say that, hey, look, Debo is going to get lined up in 5 different places in that offensive formation. Debo is going to get the ball out of the backfield. Debo is going to be running jet sweeps. Debo is going to be running routes with Terry McLaurin down the field. It's going to be super interesting to watch at with JD as quarterback. Now, assuming that the 5th round pick from Washington to San Francisco is in 2025, it will be pick number 148. That was the pick that was acquired from the Marshawn Lattimore trade from New Orleans. The net deal would then be the Commanders get Lattimore and Debo, as I was explaining earlier, for a 2025 3rd, 4th, and 6th rounder. So to get Lattimore and Debo for this year's 3rd, 4th, and 6th rounders, one of which wasn't even ours to begin with, via way of the Eagles trade. Kind of follow all that. Yep, that's where we're going, right? Eileen's checking in, says, hey, hi, Steve. How are you? Commanders are having a good offseason. So far, so good. We got so much more work to do. We got like 3 to 4 kind of big holes yet to fill, especially on the defensive side. We kind of filled one of them today. We're going to talk about it. I see your team's not doing too bad in free agency as well. So, it's kind of nice with the salary cap going up. Everybody's got tons of money to spend. Bad teams are overpaying average to, below average players and the whole 9 yards. This is what, it's basically, as they say, what a time to be alive in NFL free agency, right? This time, this week, these 3 days, 4 days as well. So why was it so important that they grabbed that number 2 wide receiver, basically in, Debo or T. Higgins or whoever they were going to be targeting? T. Higgins, by the way, was their number 1 target for wide receiver until the Cincinnati Bengals decided that they were going to franchise tag him for the 2nd year in a row. And then try and go work out that whole deal, right? Which might end up imploding in their face. And we can talk about that later if we really want to. But I'm going to remove the comment bar just so you can see the whole graphic across the bottom. But this shows why we need a true wide receiver number 2 in DC. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the graphic, you're going to see the left side is so consistent since he was drafted in the 2nd round of 2019. And that's Terry McLaurin, right? Every year he's had 1,000 yards except for his rookie season, which he had 919. So since getting drafted in 2019, Terry McLaurin has led Washington in receiving every year, and this is why he needs the help. Because if you look at the right side, regardless of the players named, Kelvin Harmon, Cam Sims, Adam Humphries, Curtis Samuel, and then Zacchaeus, nobody has had more than 656 yards receiving as a number 2 wide receiver. Now, let's also keep in mind that in that 6-year period, we've had like 18 quarterbacks or some crazy number like that. And last year was the first year that we actually had 1 solid quarterback, 2 counting the game that JD missed, and we had Marcus Mariota, but that doesn't really count, right? But we had some quarterback stability. So with that being said, you got to think that there is the serious potential for the Washington Commanders for the first time to have 2,000-yard receivers on the team and be productive that way for 1,000-yard receiving each minimum this year, with Debo Samuel, Terry McLaurin getting the ball from Jaden Daniels. Pretty awesome, right? Good stuff. And it's what we like to see here. That Adam Peters and Dan Quinn have a plan. It's just a matter of, can those guys get the people they are targeting? They target so many players, but as hey, this player goes and signs with this one. This player goes and signs with this team, gets more money over here, and we'll talk about some of the guys that left the Commanders for whatever reason, and went and signed with other teams. And we're going to talk about the guys that we picked up or re-signed in a couple minutes. But like I said, the free agent frenzy has begun. Oh my goodness. And what a way to kick it off, right? In no particular order. Maybe this is structured by, this was as of yesterday when things were getting announced, deals were getting done, and the money was just flowing, right? Started off by Buffalo Bills quarterback Josh Allen, signed that 6-year, $330 million contract. Actually had 4 years left on his current deal. Bean, the GM in Buffalo, just ended up extending him, um, adding some money, giving some cash flow to make the roster work. They signed a bunch of extensions to guys. DK Metcalf gets traded to the Steelers, turns around, signs a 5-year, $150 million deal. Myles Garrett, the guy who said, look, man, I ain't going back to Cleveland unless basically I die and you drag my body into the stadium. Lo and behold, the Browns are like, we're going to show you a bunch of money. He signs a 4-year, $160 million deal with basically 40 million a year, highest non-paid quarterback in the league. And then basically just goes down from there, right? Devontae Adams, 2-year deal with the Rams. Nick Bolton re-signs with the Chiefs. Harold Landry goes from the Titans to the Patriots. Ernest Jones signs a deal with the Seahawks. Jaron Reed signs a deal with the Seahawks. Aaron Jones turns around and signs a 2-year deal to return to the Vikings. And then today was basically, more deals, more announcements. Get that money bag, of guys that, you just see signing announcement, trade announcement, signing announcement, time announcement. Speaking of signing announcement, it was a free agent frenzy. Who did we sign? Who do we pick up? Let's talk about it, right? In no particular order. I kind of just put these as, when I put my show together, I just throw a bunch of photo screenshots in like a folder, and it's kind of just the order they pop up, right? So it wasn't in the order they were announced. It wasn't in the order they were executed. The contracts, signings, etc. We're just going to blitz and hit them, right? Team MVP until Jaden Daniels got drafted was our punter, Tress Way. He actually re-signed for a 1-year deal worth $2.8 million. In all honesty, $2.8 million is great for Tress Way. Let's be honest, there's 17 games in a season. There were don't quote me, but I want to say 7 games. So a third of the season, a little more than a third of the season. This dude didn't even kick a ball, and he got paid a couple $1 million to do it, right? How awesome and gravy would that be? Sign me up. I'll do it. I can get you 40 to 50 yards on a punt, pin him in the coffin corner. I'll do it for $2.8 million. And, oh, by the way, you don't even have to punt for 7 games out of the season, right? Just stand there on the sideline, look pretty, and then jog out to hold the snap on the extra points and the field goals. Pretty easy peasy, right? Big free agent signing for us. We let go John Allen. We're going to talk about that later on in tonight's show. But we signed defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw to the Commanders. Gets a 3-year, $45 million deal with $30 million guaranteed. A lot of discussion from the fan base about this one. AP and Kinlaw were together in San Francisco, actually, when Kinlaw got drafted. Kinlaw played for the Jets last year, kind of a subpar season. But then, and everybody's like, oh, my God, he didn't produce. He's not any better than Jonathan Allen, even though he's like a year or two younger, like that kind of deal. But in all honesty, let's look at the scope of work, right? Before he went to the Jets, he wasn't too bad. Actually had some pretty good seasons. The Jets were just a nightmare last year, so I don't think you can really judge anybody coming from the Jets last year just because from the organization from the top down was such a circus and shit show. And it bled right out onto the performance onto the field, right? So, coming into the team and into the fold with Joe Witt, Dan Quinn, I think this guy's going to have a really good year this season. Let's be honest, people are talking about the money. Is it too much? $30 million guaranteed over 3 years. Look, here's what's going to happen. The guy's going to play 2 years. Depending on how he does in 2 seasons will depend on if they keep him for the 3rd year. It's going to be a business decision where they cut him, take a little bit of dead cap hit and move on, or are they going to restructure him and give him a contract extension and move on, right? That's how it works for everybody. Then the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of it. So we'll see how that kid does. Commanders agreed to terms with tight end, I guess technically tight end number 2, John Bates on a 3-year deal. He's a terrific blocker. Actually had 61 catches for 592 yards last season. Actually had 61 catches and 592 yards in 4 seasons. That's his career stats. But like I said, he's not on the field all the time. He's always been the backup center, whether it was behind Zach Ertz last season or even, behind Thomas the season before that. So, he hasn't really gotten 100% of the play time. But he returns alongside tight end Zach Ertz, who re-upped with the team over the weekend as well. Speaking of Zach Ertz re-signed to a 1-year deal, $6.25 million. 1 year, $6.25 million deal worth $9 million with incentives. Not bad for bringing him back on a 1-year deal. I honestly think that he's got 1 to 2 years left in the tank. I was asked today why he didn't sign, or why they didn't sign him like a 2-year deal, or even like a 3-year deal, like they did with Luvu and Eckler, right? And my comment was this: is that I think he's at the point in his career where he's just going to start stringing 1-year contracts together, right? Follow me. Here's why. So we made it to the NFC Championship game last year. Awesome. Can we a, make it to that far again, or B, even crest the hump to get to the Super Bowl either this season or the season after in 26, right? And I think it's all going to come down to how Ertz does in the season. If Ertz has a fairly productive season, that's number one. And number two, stays fairly healthy, I could see him signing another year after this one. If Ertz goes through this season, gets an ankle sprain, gets a knee injury where he misses 4, 5, 6 weeks, like a third of the season, a little under a third of the season, then at the end of this season, he might just be like, I'm done. I'm retiring. I'm already got a Super Bowl. I'm good. I played for like 12 years, whatever, and rides off into the sunset. But if he can stay healthy and he thinks that he can do it again and go through the rigors of training camps, preseason, and then go through a long season, then I think he'll come back for even another year after this. But he's going to be that one year at a time guy, right? Kind of makes sense. All right. As we said, hey, look, they re-signed Bobby Wagner, which was huge to them. They extended an exclusive rights tender to running back Chris Rodriguez. Today, the big signing for today for the Commanders was they signed safety Will Harris from the Saints to a 2-year, $8 million deal. The guy's only 29 years old, 6 years in the league, 5 years with Detroit under Lance Newmark, who's the assistant GM here in DC. 13 starts for the Saints last year. He can play all over the secondary, strong safety, free safety, cornerback. Why is that kind of important to note? He and Lattimore actually played together in New Orleans, so they're going to get reunited in that secondary. Harris isn't afraid to hit anybody. So, it's going to be interesting to see what those guys do back there in the secondary. But we're going to talk about the secondary as well, with some of the other needs here at the end of free agency frenzy. Kind of last but not least, one of the things that got probably the most attention for our team here in free agent frenzy that becomes official tomorrow, the beginning of the league year, March 12th, was the trade that AP pulled off with the Houston Texans. AP calls up the Houston Texans, and it's kind of funny because it's one of those deals where GMs probably didn't even know this cat was available until you see him on the until you see him on the move on the wire, right? That he's switching teams, kind of like Howie Roseman from Philly used to do. Like he'd be acquiring guys and then be like, "Man, I didn't even know that cat was available," right? So AP sends this year's 4th round draft pick. Oh, actually, correct me. Sends this year's 3rd round draft pick, one of our 3 7th round draft picks this season. Next year, 2026, 2nd round draft pick, 4th round draft pick to the Houston Texans. In return, gets this year's 4th round draft pick, which now we have because we didn't have one before, and also gets stud left tackle Laramie Tunsil. Laramie Tunsil is arguably one of the top 5 left tackles in the league. Definitely shores up that huge hole that we had on the offensive side, on the blind side for Jaden Daniels. So props to that. Supposedly, and they got to watch the tape on him and check out his stats. He needs to be a little bit more disciplined in the penalty category, false starts and the occasional hold. I think false starts was higher than his holding was this year. Not the best run blocker, but, can arguably tell you that, he's easily pass blocking one of the 5 best tackles in the league. So, big, huge improvement and bolster to the Commanders' offensive line. Wish we could get that cat equivocally on the defensive side. And, we still got a lot of work to do between free agency and the draft to make that happen. What is kind of interesting to note is that last season, CJ Stroud was the 2nd most sacked quarterback. And yesterday, the Houston Texans traded away their starting left best offensive lineman that they had. So now, does that say more about the fact of, they're trying to move on from Tunsil? for whatever reason, we've heard work ethic get questioned. We've heard attitude. We've heard, all kinds of things. One thing that I can tell you is all the problems that you hear about supposedly for this player are going to disappear with DQ, Joe Witt, and AP. None of those three cats are going to put up with any of that crap. So it'll be interesting to see how this season works out for Tunzel. Look, after yesterday's first day of the tampering period, we still had 21 free agents to sign from last year. Big names off that list still included Dante Fowler, Marcus Mariota, Cornelius Lucas, who actually went and signed with the Browns, I think it was today, and Noah Igbinoghene. So we still got a lot of stuff to do, a lot of work to happen just to put an active 53-man roster together. But after the first 2 days of the tampering period, with the league year starting tomorrow, with the trade of Deebo Samuel, not counting the draft, because there's some question, and arguably so, that they might pursue a running back in the draft. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's not really at the top of most serious people's list. A lot of the armchair GMs, like, hey, we need a running back. And my argument was, you bolster up that offensive line, and they'll make any of our running backs 1,000-yard running back overnight, right? That's kind of just the way it is. But so what does that look like? This is what basically the projected offensive lineup is going to look like right now as it sits pre the draft, with B-Rob and Austin Eckler running back. Throw in a little Chris Rodriguez as well. I think that cat should get some more touches. And depending on how healthy B-Rob and Eckler stay, Rodriguez might get that opportunity. McLaurin and Deebo, 1 and 2. Zach Ertz, wide receiver or tight end number 1. It'll be interesting to see who falls into the wide receiver number 3 spot. Do they sign Michael Gallup, who they brought in for a workout today? Is Luke McCaffrey ready to jump up and make that spot? Are they going to re-sign Noah Brown and Zacchaeus? Are they going to go target somebody in the draft to fill it, dump into that spot and be that wide receiver number 3? That kind of remains to be seen. But as we know, it'll be super interesting to see kind of how that fills out even more so than what it kind of already is, right? So with all of that said, and the projection of where our offense should be, this is where we're at with picks for this year's 2025 NFL draft at the end of April. So first round, obviously, we're picking 29th via our trip to the NFC Championship game. Round 2, we have a pick at number 61. No third round pick this year, so we're picking in that fourth round pick that we got in the trade at 127. No fifth round pick because of the trade. Sixth round pick at 207. Traded 2 of our 3 seventh round picks away, and now we have a round 7 pick at 250. So we got 5 picks, 2 of them in the top 100 to address. We still basically have to do somebody in the secondary, certainly an edge rusher, whether that's through free agency or the draft. And then, whether we kind of just load up on defense in the draft, since our offense is pretty close to being good. Do we get one more offensive lineman in the draft, maybe with that second or fourth round pick? I could honestly see us, depending on who's available at 29 in this year's draft, because, it's not star-studded and super loaded, that, we go defense in round 1, and then either some kind of lineman and on the second round, and then, kind of just sprinkle it in from there. AP is really selective in who he picks, really good with talent evaluation and so forth. And kind of, is looking for impact players in almost the entire draft, right? Obviously we kind of always write off the round 7 picks, and, good, bad, or indifference, like kind of the way it is, whether it's the talent drop off when you get that far in the rounds. Yes, there have been guys picked in 6 and 7 that have become complete studs and, NFL greats as well, but that's kind of few and far between, let's be honest. Now, who didn't we re-sign? We're going to run through this real quick before we get to our next topic. And, look, Diami Brown, who was basically wide receiver number 2, number 3 last year, had a really productive season, especially came on in the playoffs with JD, actually went to Jacksonville on a 1-year deal for $10 million, worth up to $12 million with incentives. He's going to go down with Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. Jonathan Allen, who we released basically because of a business decision and salary cap casualty to save us $16.7 million, turned around, signed a 3-year, $60 million contract with the Minnesota Vikings today. Jeremy Chin, I was kind of actually surprised this cat left. And I get Allen. He was a business decision, cap casualty. Diami Brown and Jeremy Chin, look, when you have such an electric quarterback as JD5 and your team made it to the NFC Championship game last year, I'm kind of curious. And of course, we don't know what the conversations are. We don't know what the contract offers are. Where the contract offer is not even close to why these guys went to other teams, which is probably the answer why, more than likely. But you got to wonder, why wouldn't you just take what they offer, maybe counter with a little bit more to stay on a team that was highly successful? But Chin goes and signs with the Las Vegas Raiders for a 2-year deal for just over $16 million. Speaking of former Commanders, it was actually kind of interesting. I'll leave it at interesting to see that the Saints re-signed defensive end Chase Young to a 3-year, $51 million deal worth up to $57 million with incentives. He wasn't overly productive, had a little bit of a presence last year. Nothing like his rookie season where he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. His rookie season out of Ohio State. But I guess he had enough last year that, they wanted to throw him a bunch of money and lock him down to the tune of 3 years to $51 million. So, hey man, by all means, good for you, Chase Young, and grab that bag of money just like everybody else does. Speaking of grabbing bags of money, Commanders Gridiron is sponsored by Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. Attorney Big Al specializes in motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' compensation, personal injury claims, has 3 convenient office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey. It's one located in Philadelphia, PA, one in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, one in Pittsburgh, PA. Give Jason a call for all of your legal advice and legal representation. Tell him you saw his ad here at Out of the Box Sports. Remember, he doesn't collect if you don't win. Always a great guy, always available. Remember, that's Jason Fine, a.k.a. Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. As we drop into the second half of tonight's show, or kind of the latter half of tonight's show, one of the things that was kind of interesting that, will show, hey, let's just get right to it, right? The team report cards. Why is this interesting? Because probably the most prominent thing about all of these, as we look at it, is, there's 32 teams obviously listed, 32 teams in the league, and the players basically rate themselves based on the 6 categories up at the top. You see it's coach, owner, food, travel, weight room, and treatment of family. I think all but one category last year, so 5 out of 6. Washington was at 32, maybe 31 if I remember right. Pretty much at the bottom of the list, easy to find. This year under new ownership with Josh Harris and Adam Peters as GM, rankings went significantly higher. We jumped all the way as a team to number 11 for Washington. And, look, we got graded as an A+ for the coach, arguably coach of the year candidate Dan Quinn. The owner, Josh Harris, got an A. Food, they got a B+. Travel, they got an A. Weight room got a B+ or B-. And I know they're actually kind of working on that as well out in Ashburn. And then treatment of family is actually probably their worst grade with a C. So, overall, not bad grades. Definitely a huge improvement from where they were last year. So, if you kind of want to know how your players feel about your team, take a look at the grid, kind of find your team, see where they are, kind of go from there, right? Real quick, looking at the list, Dallas was number 10. Washington was 11. The Giants were number 20, and Philly was actually 22. It was interesting because Philly supposedly gets an F for travel. So that can include, how the transportation and how they get to where they're going, flying charters or commercial, that kind of deal. The hotels they stay in, and all that good stuff. So basically, every time there's an away game, all the things that go into that, right? But it's kind of just interesting to see where the rest of your division kind of falls in there. It's super interesting that, Miami, Minnesota, and Atlanta take the top 3 spots. Just some unique things to look at, especially with all these types of categories, and going from there. So one of the other things that I found that was super interesting, and we just got all kinds of super interesting stuff to kind of close out the show. Some of it's kind of team related, some of it isn't, right? Um, a talk that came up, especially because we come out of the season, get ready for free agency. They have talk of the competition committee meeting to figure out what they're going to add. It was announced by the NFL that they're going to be going to Hawkeye, hopefully by the beginning of the preseason to test that technology. They're still going to have the chain gang, the old guys holding on to the chains on the sideline as a backup, but they're going to be going to Hawkeye for first down measurements and shit like that. If you don't know about Hawkeye is predominantly used in professional tennis. So when you see all the replays of the ball and the little line behind it, and it shows whether it hit the line in tennis or whether inbounds or out of bounds, it's kind of the same technology that they're going to be using for football, just adapted to football from tennis, right? But one of the other things that kind of made a lot of noise on the defensive side of things and the offensive side of things is back to the discussion of the lovely tush push, right? Which kind of become famous with the Philadelphia Eagles. A couple teams run their version of it. The Buffalo Bills kind of do something similar to that with Josh Allen up there in Buffalo and, a couple other teams. But up until recently, obviously the most successful was Philadelphia. Washington sometimes figures out how to stop it against Philadelphia. Other times is completely horrible at it. There's no rhyme or reason. It kind of just is what it is. But one of the things I found super interesting was, hey, look, people from the offensive side of things are like, look, why are we why are we trying to create a rule or to outlaw a play that is successful? Like if you don't like it, then learn how to stop it, or, defend against it and go from there. And I was actually watching Mark Schlereth. I forget the name of his podcast. But I was watching his show a couple weeks ago, and he brought up this really good point, which kind of makes a valid argument for getting rid of the tush push. And he basically said this, look, in 2013, there was an NFL rule change put in place for defensive players. The players cannot push teammates on the line of scrimmage into the offensive formation because it was going to become a penalty, an unnecessary roughness penalty, loss of 15 yards from the previous spot and an automatic first down. So his argument was, hey, look, if the NFL came out, and I don't even think it was so much in the name of safety, like player safety, but they came out to make basically, I don't want to say a gift to the offense, but to make it easier for the offense, that the defense basically couldn't do the same thing that the tush push essentially does, where you're aiding another player in forward motion. They actually made it a penalty 11, almost 12 years ago now on the defensive side. How can it still be a legal play on the offensive side? Just something to think about, whether you're pro tush push, anti tush push, whatever. It kind of is what it is. So, but it's just something that, kind of made me think, because I didn't know that. So it gives you that kind of useless football Jeopardy knowledge, to go with the discussion and make you more educated on why things happen and why things can't happen, and there's whole 9 yards. So always something to think about, right? Last but not least, we're going to make our shameless plug that, hang on. Many of you will recognize this, being football fans, football viewers of the show. Old Bo Jackson. How many of you sat beside a TV for hours on end with your little Nintendo controllers in your hand playing Tecmo football with, basically it was so awesome because Bo Jackson was the best player on that game, even though the team was super crappy, right? But you could always score like 100 points with Bo Jackson because nobody could ever catch him going down the field. So this is your chance to get your hands on an autographed Tecmo photo 16 by 20 of Bo Jackson. I only got a couple of these, or I have access to a couple of these, Bo Jackson won't sign these anymore, or very limited amount. One of his recent signings we did about 2 months ago, they actually worked out a deal that he'd signed like 200 of these. And the premise, and I'll say it here because I don't know how widespread. I'm not like widespread national media, right? So I can give you the tea on why he doesn't do this anymore. But supposedly, there's no contractual agreement between Tecmo and Bo Jackson anymore. So that's number one. Number two, Bo Jackson is actually in the final stages of development for his own electronic football game. Don't know how much of a comparison it's going to be to Madden or NCAA or stuff like that, but basically it's in the final stages of Bo Jackson's football game. Whether that's like a Tecmo 2.0 or whatever, I don't know. But if you're interested in getting one of these, it's pretty cool. I can give you a price and we can go from there. Last but not least, and I would be amiss if I didn't hit this up right now, Out of the Box Sports Entertainment. Here's our weekly schedule for this week. Obviously, we are 2 days in. Commander's Gridiron is currently on and about to be off. But coming up tonight at 10:30, you can catch the part-time marks. Wednesday, we got the Bat Cave with Ken Fry at 9 a.m., followed by the Cowboys Weekly Show at 9:30 with Dave and Paul tomorrow night. Thursday, we got the NFL Weekly Talk'em Show. I think so far they've been hitting each division in the NFL as a whole, talking about those 4 teams and kind of reviewing season, talking about needs, prospective draft, blah, 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 blah. But catch those guys for NFL Weekly Talk. Friday, we got Ken back again with the Silver and Black Raiders at 9 a.m., followed by the Inside the Octagon at 7 p.m. Atomic Drop Wrestling Show, pretty cool. Lots going on if you're a WWE, NXT, TNA fan. Catch those guys on Saturday at 9 p.m. Obviously, you got a couple shows coming up there at the bottom. What's missing? There's a lot of opportunity for anybody that would like to start their show. It's not very hard to sit here for an hour and talk about your favorite team, talk about your favorite league. Doesn't matter what genre of sports you got. Hockey, basketball, football, baseball, doesn't matter. Baseball is in spring training, getting ready to start at the end of the month. Hockey season's gearing up for the end of the season, getting ready to go into the NHL playoffs starting. I'll throw a shameless plug for my beloved first place Washington Capitals. Alex Ovechkin only 8 goals away from tying the great one. NFL season, there's always news year-round about them, and basketball is going to be going into the playoffs here shortly as well. And, of course, it doesn't even have to be about those 4 sports. If you want to start any other kind of show, hit me up, hit my buddy up, Paul Spencer. We'll get you a slot. We'll get you a show. You can sit here and talk about your favorite team for an hour. With that being said, no pun intended, no joking aside, our next show right now is slated for April 1st, April Fools. Yes, it's a couple weeks away, but I think, we're going to be able to recap fully the free agent frenzy that we've in, kind of see where we still have holes left after the league year officially starts tomorrow. If AP pulls any more trades, if we sign any more free agents, that'll put us about 3 weeks, solid 3 weeks before we go into the draft. So we'll definitely be able to talk about the upcoming NFL draft being held in Green Bay as well, kind of where our needs are, where we might see the guys leaning, which is super hard for our team. And then, of course, we'll probably end up going into the NFL draft show again here at Out of the Box Sports on the 24th, as we normally do. So obviously April 1st, our next show, same time, same place. Thank you for checking out our show tonight. Remember, be a friend, tell a friend, give us a like, subscribe, and follow at our social media handles at Out of the Box Sports Entertainment, as well as Commander's Gridiron. And until then, have a good evening.